All right, guys, we're working on the differential on the first gen again. Now I have all the bits and pieces to put this baby back together, so we are going to do so. So I kind of got it apart. I had to pull it apart today because they gave me the wrong bearing set the first time. So I wanted to make sure I got the right bearing set the second time. So I have some of it apart already, but I'm going to explain, it might be easier actually with it apart, and explain how to pull some of this stuff apart for you guys that are interested in doing this. So technically, I guess I'm not rebuilding the diff, I'm rebearing the diff. So I guess it depends on how you look at it. I call it rebearing. Rebuild, in my opinion, you're putting new ring and pinion and that type of stuff in. We're not doing that on this one, but the process is exactly the same, except for you're gonna have to reset some stuff. But obviously we're gonna have to check everything to make sure it was set up properly to begin with. So this is Dana 80, or sorry, this is a Dana 70, and it has a U code on it. So I've already pulled the pinion and obviously pulled the carrier and stuff out, and I did this prior to this. If you guys watched the videos earlier, you would have seen that of me narrowing the diff. Now, the reason that we're rebearing it is because it had some rust in it. I was not planning on doing that to start with, but it actually ended up being good because the posi needs to be rebuilt. I will do a separate video rebuilding the posi when we get that far. So, pulling pinion out. What I recommend for this, unless you guys have a good impact gun, lots of times they're pretty hard to get. The nut is hard to get off. So as long as you have the right size socket to pull it off. For this one, the nut that was on here was 1 5/16 inches. What I recommend doing is leave the tires. Just the very first thing you want to do, if you know you're doing this, in my opinion, is what you want to do is pull the drive shaft down, get somebody to sit in the truck for you, hold the brakes, and break the nut loose on the yoke. So basically your pinion yoke. So this is the yoke, the drive shaft yoke, and then this is the nut. There's usually a washer underneath there, but that is the nut that goes on there. These ones aren't as bad as a Dana 80. The Dana 80 is a way bigger yoke. So they're way tighter. But I always find that if you loosen this first, you can do it with a breaker bar. Even doing the impact gun, it tends not to move around on you. I don't know, I've done enough of them now that I just know what to do and what not to do. This one obviously was apart, so I couldn't do that. I just had to hold on to it. But I have a pretty expensive impact gun with lots of air pressure. So that is what I recommend to do to start with. Now, you don't want to take it right off, but just loosen it so that it's not tight. Your next thing is you're going to want to pull your diff cover off. A little trick with that, if it's been siliconed on there, what I recommend doing is take a torch. So when you're up here, take a torch, like just a propane torch, and heat up this edge a little bit, and the silicone will come off way easier. You can just chisel it off, but sometimes you screw the cover up, and if you do it, you heat it up a little bit, or even you can do it with an oxy-acetylene torch too. It's just sometimes you screw up the cover. So you don't have to worry about that if you do that. So at that point, when you get your cover off, your oil drained out, you can pull the carrier out. And pulling the carrier out is not very hard. You do want to be careful you don't drop that. But you do need to pull your axles out first. So I guess I should talk about that a little bit. So pull the axles out. There again, super easy. The axles are not in here, but you just take these bolts out. And if it's been siliconed on there, the easiest way to do it is you just take a hammer and swat the end of it. If you swat the end of it, the axle will pop out. They're not really in there, like they're not held in there by anything on a full floater anyway. They're just held on by this. So pull both axles out. You'll have to pull, I personally, at that point, you pull your axles out. You can get your tires off if you're doing all the seals and bearings. If you're going as far into it as doing that, usually you are, unless you're just doing a rear gear or something. But even still, personally, if I'm changing the bearings there, I change the outer bearings too, just the way I am. So at that point, you want to pull the carrier out. And what you're going to want to do is your carrier supports, or supports, whatever you want to call them, are these. And on this diff, they are 3/4 inch or 19 mil. One thing that I do recommend doing is, if you can see here, you can see there where I've put 2 dots. And that for me is, I know that this is this side, number 2. I always put number 2 on this side, number 1 on that side. If you had letter stamps, you could do a letter too. I always mark these because you want to make sure you put them back in the right spot, because these are bored in there. So they're supposed to be set they're set. They have to go back in the right spots. Otherwise stuff will be misaligned and it'll be a bad day. Then you got to screw around or you break stuff. So just mark them. Super easy to mark. You can mark it 100 different ways. You mark it with a paint marker or something. The thing with a paint marker is you can wipe it off. I always just use a stamp of some sort and mark it. And if you just have, you know, if you're just have a center or a chisel or something, you could just mark it. You know, mark it with a mark, and then mark up in here somewhere. You know, mark up in here somewhere on one of them. So if you know that this one is good, if that's in the right spot, this one obviously has to be in the right spot, right? So pull the carrier out. You want to pull both of these off, and then I use an adjustable heel bar. You can just use a pry bar. And what I do is I just put it up against here like that, and you literally just want to hook it into the carrier. And as soon as it starts to move, stop, because you don't want to drop this thing on your foot. You literally can just hook it into here, any open spot, and you just kind of jiggle it back and forth. As soon as it starts to move, I usually stop, but they do usually have a little bit of preload when they go in there. And that's fine. They're supposed to be like that. And when you put it back in, there needs to be a little bit of a preload, so that way the bearings are preloaded. So get that back in, or get that out of there, just like I said, to make sure you don't drop it on your foot. And now you're basically, oh, okay, you got this out of there. Now you're going to want to take your pinion out. Now this is the reason that you loosen this nut to start with, because now there's nothing to hold this, right? Pull this nut out. Now, how I do it, I have a air hammer with a center pin on it, or with a centering chisel on it, whatever you want to call it. I just put it in there, and you can just and knock it out. It comes out real easy. These ones aren't that bad to get out. Some of them, the yoke is really, really stuck on them. These ones aren't that bad. That's how I usually do that. Now, you can do it there again with a drift and a hammer. Just a little bit harder with that, because as soon as it starts to move, they kind of come apart really easily and very quickly. So you want to just be careful that you don't drop that, because if you're reusing the gears, you can chip a gear and then it turns into a bad day, because then you got to buy gears. So you literally just you end your, like I usually just use this, and you literally do this while it's still in there and just burp it out. Now, if you got a buddy helping you, just get him to grab a rag and, you know, hold backside, pull, you know, get the yoke off. Now on this Dana 70, you're going to want, ouch, just swatted my finger. You want to be careful here, because there is shims underneath this. So this is the shim that was underneath it. This shim pack is what was underneath there. You need to make sure that you keep track of what was in there, because that's going to give you a starting point of where you're going to put it back to start with. Especially if you're just rebearing it, usually you don't have to monkey with any of this stuff. You can put it back the way it was and it'll be good. You still need to check it though, because you not always will they be good. I will explain when we get into it farther. So like I said, just keep track. I usually don't even clean these to start with. I will usually throw them in here, and I know what they're from. So just make sure that you get everything in the right spot. So these ones go on this side, and then you'll see this bigger guy, it goes here. So it goes on the other side. It goes on the outside of the bearing. And these ones go, the bearing just slips down on top of here. And basically what these shims are for setting preload on the bearings. That's what they're for. Fine. Now, if you're putting new gears, you kind of have two options. Either you can measure it, which is the proper way, your pinion depth, and set your pinion depth that way. You still need to check it though afterwards with marking die. Or the proper way is to check it with a pinion depth checker. And if you do that, then you know that it's going to go back in the right spot. Now, if you're just re-gearing, 99% of the time, you can literally just put this shim back in, put the bearing on, and it will be good. Not always, so sometimes you will curse yourself. I have cursed myself lots of times. But most of the time you're good. So that's what, you just want to keep track of that shim. Lots of times when I'm doing this, if I'm blowing the diff all apart and putting it all back together one day, I just clean everything, set everything out on a bench. This is going to be over a couple days, so I've done enough times, I just know to keep in track of everything. And then also too, if you look at these ones, see how there's shims in there, so you got to keep track of those shims as well. So we need to rebuild this though. So at this point here now, you guys would have seen the video. Yeah, I guess you either have seen the video or haven't seen the video yet for rebuilding the posi lock. If you haven't seen it, it will be coming out. If you have seen it, then perfect. If you are seeing this not in 2023, there is a video for rebuilding the power lock. It will be in the link in the description after it drops. So I've already pulled this bearing off, and the reason for that was I thought the camera was rolling, it was not. So I'll show you how to take the other one off. We got to put this one on. I am waiting for my toaster oven to warm it up. That's how I heat them up, is with a toaster oven. There's lots of different ways you can do it. That's how I do it. And these are the shims that I was speaking of. I'm going to brake clean them off, but you want to make sure that these shims go back in the same sides, in the same spots. If the shims have any wear or they're screwed up or anything like that, I would recommend replacing them. These ones are still in pretty good shape. I don't see any issues with them as far as, you know, like nothing was moving or wearing. So we're going to reuse those. I'm just going to brake clean them off. We'll put the new bearing on this side. I'll pull the other one off. Now there is a tool for doing this job. I do not have one. I have used one before, and I'm probably going to buy one because I actually have a few diffs in the next few years that I want to rebuild and rebearing and regear and all that stuff. So I will be doing more of these videos, but I'll put a picture of it right, I don't know, over here somewheres. I would like to buy one of those tools. They're not crazy expensive, and if you're doing differential stuff, my opinion, worth every cent. So I just don't have one. So that is something that I will be buying in the near future. So the next time we do one, we'll have one. So I don't know. We have this bearing to pull off, put on. We're going to put this one back on. We'll pull the other one off, get that swapped around. I have the pinion in the parts washer right now. I have the parts washer shut off so it's not noisy for you guys. And then we will probably, I guess I gotta clean out the diff, knock out some bearing races. I'll show you when we do that too. So I'm going to throw you guys in a time lapse to get this bearing on, and then I'll put you into real time for the other side. All right, guys, we're on waiting for those bearings to heat up in the old toaster oven. We're gonna pull these races out. So how I do is I just hammer them out, but you're gonna need a punch, a decent sized punch or a chisel or something. If you're using a chisel, I usually knock the edge off the chisel so it's not sharp. But obviously this one has to get punched this way, and then the other one's got to get punched that way. So I'm gonna grab the chisel that I use for doing this, and probably the drift that I usually use, as long as I can find it. So we'll knock those out, and then the tubes and stuff I've already cleaned out, but we might just shoot a little bit of brake clean in them, just make sure they're flushed out. We'll probably grab the vacuum and stuff, and we'll suck out the rest of the guck and stuff after we get the races out, get this thing cleaned up a bit inside while we're waiting for those bearings. So I'm gonna get after doing that, and yeah, so I'm gonna do it from the other side, and then this one I'll do from the other side, or I'll do from this side, so you'll be able to see both ways. Just want to go on both sides. Not usually that hard to get out. You just don't drive it from one side because you'll screw the bore up. So all you got to do is just get on that edge of the bearing and then tap it out of there. Actually, I think I'm going to. This one's a little bit tighter for space, so we'll just use the punch for this one. Okay, so we got pinion out of the parts washer. This bearing has definitely seen better days. Some of it actually, I don't know whether or not it's rust damage or if it was because it wasn't set up properly. But there's the bearing, and like I said, it's pretty shrapnel, so we will change that. This is a bearing puller, basically a bearing remover tool, whatever it's actually called, I don't know. Bearing splitter, I think they call it. bearing splitter. Bearing on! Okay, let's pull this thing off. I realize that the background noise is kind of annoying, but part of the show. All right, well, they're supposed to come off easier than that. This one did not. Okay, we're going to try doing it this way. Not the way you're supposed to do it. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. I probably should have pulled the bearings off. shouldn't have. I should have left it going. There we go. So this side we need to tap down because of the shims. There we go. Usually I use an old bearing race or something. If the bearings come off easy, if you have that tool that I don't have, usually I just cut the cage and you can use that because it actually doesn't go on there far enough. This one that I cut works perfect for it. But you can tap that on. So now bearings are done there. So we're going to shove this to the side. This is the new bearing for here. We'll shove this. Okay, so I have this in the freezer. It is not frozen. It's definitely cooler than it was when we started. I am just going to grab the bearing and we'll drop that on there. Should have a pair of gloves, but I don't want to wreck my new welding gloves. So there we are. Drop right on. Okay, so what we need to do is we have to put these. Okay, so we got to put the shims back in here because that's where the shims have to go. Okay, so this is the shim pack that goes in there. Depending on what diff you're working on, sometimes they're going to go behind this bearing, and then sometimes they're going to go behind the pinion. So it just depends on what you're working on. So we are going to put this, make sure that's the right bearing, put these shims in there, and then we're gonna pound this back in. Oil shield. These go in between the bearings. They're the shims for the preload. We probably will have to change those. That's okay. We're just going to set this up to start with just how it is and see how we get what we get for everything. So this is kind of a bit of a juggle when you're doing it yourself, and I'm doing it myself. So bear with me here for a second. Yeah, the pinion preload. Oh, actually, I shouldn't say that. Oh, yeah, that's too tight. Yeah, we'll definitely have to re-shim that, but that's okay. We'll get the actually, I guess I should swap that. Hold on. Make sure that bearing and all that stuff is good. All right, we're definitely gonna have to reshim that, but that's okay. We can reshim. We have the shims, but we're gonna put the carrier back in and see what our pattern looks like. Hopefully we don't have to monkey with that side of it, because that's a little bit more screwing around. So hopefully we don't have to deal with that part. Oh, actually, I wonder if I should just set that up. Okay, we're gonna take this back apart again and add a shim to the preload, because it's definitely gonna be too tight, because when I tighten it, you can't turn it. I'm gonna do this before I put the carrier in, decided. Only because I don't wanna have to screw around and take it back out after. So. Okay, so just thought I'd come over here and show you guys. So this is what we have in there for shims. I've got it written down, 20, 17, 35. And this is what I have for a selection. And we need to pull some shim out. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the 17 out and I'm gonna take the 15. And that's what we're gonna put in there, because that will tighten it up a little bit. I think that will give us what we want. Hopefully. If not, we'll have to take it apart again. Let's see. All right, guys, so I got this set up now. We're about where I want it. We're just pretty close to 25. So it wants between 18 and 30 is what it wanted. So I think that will be more than fine. So you can do this without that. You know, like I don't know. You kind of get to know the feeling of it. Now this is a brand new bearing. So if it's not brand new bearings, obviously you've got to be a little bit more, you got to be a little looser. But you can look it all up. It's not too hard. Lots of rebuild kits actually will have the information right in there for you. You know, if you're re-gearing or whatever, most of the time they'll give you this information. So I'm going to put the center section in. We're going to check the pattern, and then I am going to call it for a night. Okay. That's way easier when it's on a stand. All right, guys, so we're gonna put the pinion seal in. Now I always put a little bit of stuff on the bearing, whatever kind of slippery goo you have. And then the seal, just wanna make sure you don't cover it in oil like I just did, because they leak if you do sometimes. You just get it set in there, and then you take your seal pounder pound it in. Shay actually came up with a good idea. Shay's there, you guys can't see him, but use an old bearing race that I just happened to have one that was the right size because I was trying to find a socket that I would usually use and I couldn't find it, so we used the bearing race. So I think I'm actually going to keep that in the kit for now. Next time we need to do when I have it. All right guys, so we're now working on the hub. We did check the, Shay's just cleaning bolts, so don't mind the noise that he's making. Wire wheeling the guck off them. We did check the pattern on it. The pattern's not perfect, but for a used set of gears, I'm okay with it. Should actually be a little deeper than that, but it'll be okay for what we're doing. I believe we checked the backlash as well, which we just put a dial indicator on it and checked the backlash. And we're at like a solid 9.5 to 10. Just right on the end of, high end of spec, but used gears, I'm fine with that. So we are going to hammer these races out. The races actually don't look that bad, but anyways, we got new races, so we'll put the new races in. We're going to hammer these races out, get the new bearings in there. I got a new seal. I'm not sure why I ended up with one, but I got more coming, so hopefully they'll come. We'll get this changed around. We'll put it on the truck, and then when we do take the other one off, I will show you guys how to take it off, I guess. I guess it's not really that big a deal to take it off. It's basically the same as putting it on, just the opposite. So, because that one's already half apart anyway. So, anyways, and then I'll show you the tightening procedure and all that jazz. So, that's probably the most, you know, the most critical is the tightening procedure, really, when it comes to this. So, let's get these races pounded out of here. Yeah. All right, guys, so on this, before you put the hub on, you'll make sure everything is good and clean. Obviously, we blasted this one, so it's nice and clean. I don't remember if I blasted the other one or not, but anyways, everything's good on it. I put a little bit of oil on these threads so that when you put the new nut on, everything doesn't get bunged up. I'm gonna go grab the hub. You guys would have seen me put that stuff back together. Make sure you don't catch your seal on the threads because it'll screw the thread, the seal up. I always put a little bit of lube on the actual bearing itself, same with on the inside one. What you use is completely up to you. You can use grease. I usually use assembly lube. Lots of guys say you're not supposed to use assembly lube, but anyways, I use assembly lube. Also, I use new nuts. I'll probably put a link in the description for these if you're interested, and then also the little locking key, which I'll show you here in a minute when we get this tightened up. The only reason I use a new nut is because they're not that expensive, and if you have a wheel fall, so we're going to torque the nut down to 120 foot-pounds. The spec is 120 to 140. So we're going to torque it down to 120. And it still turns, but it's definitely on the tight side. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to back it off a third of a turn. Okay, so now we got to go a third of a turn. So we're a quarter of a turn here. We're just kind of going to get the torque wrench to kind of go in here somewhere. Yeah. That's too loose. I can feel the click in it. And basically what you're looking for now is
half a turn would have done it then, or a quarter turn would have done it then.
Yeah.
So that's about what you took out, was that extra little bit.
And basically what they say you want is actually put a dial gauge on it and actually measure it if you wanted to. I'm not going to bother, but we're going to call that. All right, so now that we got that done, something that I always recommend to everybody is there's these little lock clips. So to put new nut on, and then these little lock clips. I think they call them wedges actually, but they go inside the groove here. See that little groove right there? And you just put it in there, and this keeps that from coming off and your wheel falling off. that's all you got to do. Pretty simple. So I think now we got that done. We're going to test fit the axle. But I'm going to throw you guys in a time lapse because we're going to have to do a little bit of screwing around. We're going to put the axle in, I think, on this side. We're going to get the diff cover on. But before I put the diff cover on, I might torque the pinion nut, or try. We'll see. I haven't decided yet.
Well, this is about where I realized that I didn't put the rotor on the back side. Yeah, so I had to take it back apart again. So after we did all that, I took it back apart and we fixed the rotor to it. But the studs that I ordered to hold the rotor on were the wrong ones, so we'll have to do that later. So I will talk about the disc brake setup as soon as I get that done for you guys, just so you, for you guys that are interested in the disc brake setup. So we got the diff all buttoned up as far as it goes. There was a little bit of footage that I seem to have lost, but we got the diff all fixed up, and it's all sealed up now, except for the axle gaskets I don't have, which we will have on Monday. Thought I had a couple and did not. So that will conclude this. I will do another video actually completely rebuilding one of these because I have some bearings to do so. One of the subscribers, Jim, sent me some gears for the front of my truck to change when we do the front diff swap in my truck. So we will do that then.
Hey guys, check out the merch store, cutteruprob.com, link in the description, for all the new merch that I just dropped. Help out the channel.